Hello everyone and welcome to Fiction Friday. Today we have episode 9 of The Squire. I hope you enjoy it.
Cole didn't bother to paddle. Instead, he let the current do the work. He adjusted their course when the canoe strayed too far from the center of the river, but otherwise just enjoyed not having to run for a while. The wolfman kept pace with them on the bank. He glanced over every once in a while. Cole didn't know much about reading wolfman body language, but that bunch looked pissed. He grinned. "What are you smiling about?" Rain asked. "Just enjoying the wolfman's travails. How are you holding up?" She sighed. "I'm glad to get off my feet, and terrified that this little boat will tip and I'll drown. Don't worry, the White River doesn't have any rapids on this end. Try to get some sleep. You'll need all your strength when we leave the water." Rain closed her eyes for a few seconds, then opened them again. "Would you have killed that man if he hadn't stepped aside?" "Yes. He would have hated it and been sick for days, but he would have done it." Cole grabbed the satchel from the floor of the boat. He rummaged through it and found 6 strips of jerky. He offered one to Rain. "Hungry?" She frowned at the strip of mystery meat, then started gnawing. A minute later, her throat worked as she swallowed the stringy meat. "Not exactly gourmet, but better than yesterday's lunch." Cole took another bite. "We didn't have any lunch yesterday." Cole smiled. "Exactly. How can you smile at a time like this? I can't decide if I want to cry, scream, or both. We're still alive, Princess. We have a nice, wide river between us and the monsters that want to eat us. Last night, when we lay under those pixie pines, I figured we were dead. All day today, I figured those wolfmen would catch us and kill us. They didn't. We're alive and safe, for the moment at least. How could I not smile? Though I will grant you that our situation has room for improvement." Rain stared at him for a moment, then threw her head back and laughed. She laughed so hard her whole body shook. When she got herself under control, she said, "You're mad." "Perhaps a little. It's not such a bad thing in this line of work." When Cole judged Rain had fallen asleep, he took the satchel and combed through it. The old man packed the necessities, but not much else. He found string and wire for repairing traps, a skinning knife that looked sharp enough to shave with, and a line with a hook on the end. Cole took the line and tied it around his finger. Not the best arrangement, but maybe he'd catch something. He baited the hook with a piece of jerky and tossed it into the water. Cole sighed, feeling like a kid again, fishing off the end of the dock. He enjoyed the illusion for a few minutes before a frustrated howl from the riverbank drew him back to reality. The sun would set in a few hours. How long did those wolfmen plan to follow them? He woke from a doze when something tugged on his finger. Cole blinked sleep from his eyes. The tug became steady, and he remembered the fishing line. He hauled the line in, hand over hand. When he pulled the end out of the water, a fat, foot-long trout wriggled on the hook. Cole's mouth watered. Some quick knife work, and he had a pair of clean fillets. He tapped Rain's foot, and she sputtered awake. "What?" Cole held up the fillet. "Fresh food." He handed her the fish. Rain held it between her thumb and forefinger at arm's length, like he'd handed her a dead rat. "I can't eat this. It's raw." "Raw fish is perfectly safe, just mind the pin bones." Cole picked meat from around the little bones. It needed salt, olive oil, and 5 minutes over a hot fire. "It's not so bad." Rain picked the meat from her fillet. "Nothing like missing a few meals to help you appreciate the next one." Cole finished his snack, baited the hook with some of the guts, and tossed it over the side. 4 more trout like that and he might feel full. "I haven't had fish that fresh since I left home, though the odd bits I picked out of the fishmonger's trash pile weren't as tasty as trout." Rain finished the last of the fish and tossed the skin into the water. "You got your food from the trash heap?" "On a good day." Cole yawned. He needed a little more sleep. "A good day? What did you get on a bad day?" "Nothing." "Nothing? Surely your parents could afford to feed you." "My father got crippled in a work accident. He fell from the mast of the ship he was helping build. the more experienced healers from the temple were tending the Lord Mayor. It seems he had an upset stomach. A first-year initiate botched the job setting his leg so he couldn't work anymore. A year later, my mother and sister died of red haze. He turned inward and stopped interacting with the world. I was 8 when it became clear that if I wanted to eat, I'd best learn to manage on my own. The Lord Mayor was fine. I heard several large belches settled his stomach. Rain stared at him, mouth agape. That may be the worst thing I've ever heard. How did you go from that to a squire? When I was 10, I spotted a rich-looking noble walking through the market and tried to pick his pocket. He caught me and dragged me back to the one-room shack where my father and I lived. He was going to tell my father what I'd done and leave my punishment up to him. When he saw where we lived and the state of my father, he offered to take me in. That was Sir Garrus? Cole nodded and smiled a sad smile. He made me his page and gave my father a room at his estate and a nurse to look after him. When I showed him I wasn't afraid to work hard and could follow rules, he made me a squire. That's been my life until the beastmen arrived. No wonder you honor his last order with such zeal. To think that a nobleman's stomachache changed your life to such an extent. She shook her head. If our places were reversed, I would hate nobles as well. It wasn't the stomachache, Princess. It was the arrogance to believe his needs required not 1, not 2, but all 3 of the temple's senior healers. He left nothing for anyone else. Every noble I've met thinks the same way, save one, and he's dead. Rain stiffened. Do you think I'm the same sort of arrogant noble? Cole looked away from her toward the bank. The wolfmen had given up the chase for now, though Cole doubted they'd seen the last of the beastmen. Answer me. Her commanding tone set Cole's teeth on edge. Do you think you aren't? When's the last time you did anything for anyone? She opened her mouth and pointed at him, then blew out a sigh. I can't remember. Cole nodded, but remained silent. You let them escape? Zarin stood in the night-shrouded courtyard listening to the psychic voice of the pack leader. The pack had failed him. It took all the self-control he had gained over the past 900 years not to call the dark and send it screaming through the link he shared with the pack leader. Even the best hunters had a bit of bad luck now and then. Return to the castle. There's other work to be done. Zarin severed the connection and headed into the castle. He'd prepared a casting chamber in case he needed to perform more potent magic. It seemed he'd need to use it sooner than he expected. In a windowless room in the basement, Zarin sat in a rune-inscribed circle. He placed his hands on the floor and channeled the dark. The runes flared with purplish-black flames. Nothing could approach his body now without facing annihilation. With his protection in place, Zarin began the spell that would free his spirit from its current host. 10 minutes later, Zarin's disembodied spirit floated above his body, a silver cord extending from his heel to the top of the corpse's head. The psychic tether would allow him to return in an instant. Zarin willed his spirit up and out of the castle. It took only seconds for him to fly to the White River. He followed it south until he found, floating as peaceful as you please, the 2 fugitives. The princess slept in the front of a small canoe while the boy guided it, half asleep in the back. This would be simple. Zarin floated down toward the boy. The princess's celestial blood, thin as it was, made it impossible for him to possess her, but blood didn't come any more common than the boy's. He'd take control of the boy's body, strangle the girl, and then cut his throat with his own sword. Zarin reached out to enter the boy, but before his spectral form reached the boy's body, he struck a glowing barrier of light. He snarled and drew back. How could the boy have any protection from him? Zarin peered closer, and around the boy's neck hung a gold amulet. Someone gave the whelp a knight's medallion. The mystic connection between the amulet and the holy sword protected him from Zarin's touch. Worse, in his disembodied form, he lacked the use of his other magic. Zarin cursed silently in a language that no longer existed. He couldn't kill them now, but he knew where they were headed. The only possible place was the port of Rel. He willed himself back to his body. The weight of the corpse settled around his spirit, and Zarin stood. A wave of his hand dissolved the protective barrier. Zarin sent a silent call to his army. When the princess arrived in Rel, she'd find his army waiting. Cole's back popped as he stretched. He'd spotted the small island, more of a gravel bar if he was honest, in the middle of the river, and beached the canoe to give them a chance to stretch their legs. After most of a day in the cramped canoe, it felt great to walk around. "How long until we reach the city?" Rain asked. "A day? Maybe 2? That reminds me." Cole held out the satchel. "Put your jewelry in here." Rain smirked at him. "What is this, a robbery?" "Hardly, but all that gold will attract too much attention in Rel. We need to look like we have nothing worth stealing. I promise, if we live, you can have it all back. Or at least whatever's left after we hire a ship to carry us to Celestia." Rain offered a long-suffering sigh and pulled off her jewelry. "What's so great about Celestia anyway? It's the most powerful of the Lake Kingdoms, and the royal family has a reputation for generosity. Hopefully they'll offer you sanctuary. Father always said Corinthia was the strongest." She stopped walking and spun toward him. "What do you mean, offer me sanctuary? Don't you mean us?" Cole shook his head. "Once you're safe, I'm coming back to hunt down the bastard that murdered Sir Garrus." "Don't be stupid. He's got an entire army. What can you hope to do on your own?" Cole shrugged. "I don't plan on taking him on alone. They attacked the capital, but there are thousands of soldiers garrisoned around the kingdom. If I can warn them and gather them together, we can hit back. I'd be useless hanging around at court in Celestia. I doubt the nobles there have any more use for a commoner than the nobles in Corinthia did." "What about me?" Rain's voice held a little tremor. "You'd leave me all alone in a strange country?" "You'd be among your own kind. You're a princess, after all. I'm sure you'll have plenty of people sucking up to you before long." "My own kind? You talk like I'm a different species." Cole headed back to the canoe. They needed to get moving again. "Do you remember the first time you spoke to me?" Rain blinked and shook her head. Her eyes widened. "At the stables, just a few weeks before the attack." Cole held the canoe steady. "That's right. You ordered me to fetch your horse. No greeting, no acknowledgement that I existed beyond your needs at that moment. You didn't see another person. You saw a lesser being who served no purpose beyond doing what you wanted when you wanted it. That's all people like me are to your kind. Servants when you need something and invisible when you don't." Rain stood beside the canoe and looked at him. "You really think that, don't you?" Cole met her gaze, saw the pain in her eyes. She seemed genuinely upset. It seemed no one had ever told her servants had feelings. He knew he should let it go. They still had a lot of miles to cover together. He couldn't, though. "Did you ever speak a kind word to me before I saved your life? Did you ever thank Jack or Joey for their hard work? Did you know little Melissa spent hours searching the fields near the castle for bluebells because she knew they were your favorite flowers?" She stared at him, not understanding. Cole shoved his anger away. Of course she didn't understand. What did he expect? "Forget it, Princess. Let's go." "Who are they? Please, I'd like to know." "Jack and Joey were the stable boys and my best friends. Melissa and her mother tended your chambers. Melissa was a sweet little girl that worshipped you, despite the fact that you had no idea she existed. They're dead now. Them and hundreds more like them. People you wouldn't see if they walked past you. They're not your kind, Princess, and neither am I." He gestured to the canoe and saw the tears on her cheeks when she climbed in. He winced, then sighed. "It's all right, Princess. You can't help who you are. I didn't mean to upset you." He gave her shoulder a squeeze. Cole pushed the canoe out into the river, then climbed in. Rain wiped the tears away. "Would you tell me about them? The servants? People you knew?" Her interest seemed sincere. Cole couldn't imagine why, but he'd indulge her. It would help pass the time, and perhaps she'd learn to appreciate the people around her. Maybe pigs would sprout wings and fly.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Fiction Friday. If you like what you heard, you can find more of my fiction on my website, jamesewisher.com. Please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing with anyone else you think might enjoy the show. Until next week, goodbye.